time.
Probably.
Right?
I am known to talk a little bit. It's okay.
That is fine. It does show us live on both our YouTube and Facebook. I will be right back to you.
You bet.
It's a good thing I'm not one of those people that only dresses from the top up, for these Zoom type of calls. Otherwise, it would be a disaster.
Hop out and show your PJ bottoms or your shorts or
whatever casual item that you've got going
whatever
on.
The new Zoom attire is, right?
That is the new normal. It is. It's the new normal. There is a video. I'll find it and send it to you on Instagram. It was this lady. Anyway, she gets on and she realizes people have their camera on. So she just slides everything off her desk, throws her contacts or her glasses up, pins her hair back and goes. But that's the age that we're in. So I already see a couple folks that are hopping on. Thank you for starting to jump onto our national updates for COVID. If you are tuning in, do me a huge favor and give me a thumbs up. I also like reactions. You can give me a heart. Just don't give me the angry face. Feel free to start commenting on the video as well so I can see you and give you a shout out here momentarily. Perfect. Awesome. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. And as you guys are starting to hop on, please do me a huge favor and let me know who's tuned in. I already see Nick and a couple of other folks. Good morning to you. Happy Tuesday. I am Juliette Abdel, your chamber president and CEO. And if this is your first time onto our page, do not let it be the last. Hit the like button, hit the follow. It's a little button at the very top, and get notified when we do post any videos or any additional fresh new content. Of course, at the very same time that we're streaming this here on our Facebook page, we also have it streamed on our YouTube channel. That's Westminster Chamber of Commerce, where you can feel free to send that link to people who might be in Facebook jail or prison, as you might know, for commenting too blatantly or posting something that Facebook doesn't agree with. So anyways, let them know that we're also streaming on our YouTube page. And of course, connect with us on all of our social media platforms. We're on Instagram, we're on Twitter at Westy Chamber, and of course on LinkedIn, Westminster Chamber of Commerce. I see our past board chairman, Brian Dice. I also see Parker. Parker, it is snowing out, so I feel like the French onion soup would be perfect for today. Just saying, if you want to cross the street and get that to me, I would totally welcome you to my apartment. But as you are returning to view our videos, for all of you that are with us, have been with us for about a year now since we've kicked these live broadcasts off, please continue to do us the favor of hitting the share button on your end so others in your network can see more of the work that we're doing, hear from our experts more than me, and get a chance to ask them any questions or comments that they might have. So with that, I just want to go ahead and pull up. I already see Parker has given me a nice good morning message. This is our way of interacting and engaging with you. So if you have not already familiarized yourself with the comment section on this video, please feel free to type in any pleasantries that you might have, any comments if Jeff says something that's wildly obnoxious, or any questions that you might have for him. I can't guarantee that he'll tame it back, but it's still nice for us to know kind of what you're picking up, what nuggets of knowledge are being absorbed, and other things that might steer the conversation with us. So most of you have been with me and know that these are highly engaged. I like to be as lively as possible because we have Zoom calls, we've got other go-to meetings, and who knows what, that we just get so drained from staring at somebody's screen. So it's going to be upon me to try and make this as engaging as possible, and I hope that you continue to follow along. I have with me Jeff Wasden, and Wazzy Jeff, as he's also known, has led in the past our Colorado Business Roundtable. I've known Jeff for about 2 years now, and although he has departed, big loss for Colorado, he has actually gone over to DC and has been doing some amazing work over there, stays in contact, and gives me some updates along the way. So we've already provided you a national update. I want to say it was, do you remember, Jeff, was it about 8 months ago?
Probably at least 7-8 months ago. Yeah. It seems like. Yeah, it's been probably too long for our twice a year or once every other month or monthly. So once every 8 months seemed to be about right. So we'll see.
Right. So it's been a while since we last had a national update. And since he's the boots on the ground, he's really seeing everything right there in front of him, and is a fiend for all the information that's coming out from not only the White House, but other agencies. Figured we'd bring him back on here and pick his brain, hear what he's got to say. And if if we have questions, of course, to direct it to him. But Jeff, the floor is all yours. I told you I'd only hog it up for a couple of minutes, and I think I've gone over that. But if you would like to enlighten us on all things national, we would greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me back, first and foremost. And I can tell you unequivocally that there is nothing more exciting going on in DC than a semifinal appearance from our own Juliet out in Vegas. So let me start by formally congratulating you, on your showing and representing Colorado. And I would say it did not matter to any of us how you placed, what you've done. It was so aspirational and such a great example for so many people across the state. You've brought so much awareness and great causes to the forefront. I'm so excited to see what you do with that. But congrats on your showing and representing Colorado so well. So I wanted to make sure I got that. That was far more important than talking about infrastructure and immigration and 51st statehood and
all of that important stuff.
Reapportionment and reconciliation and, all these little things that I get to smile and pay attention to. But we're on the heels, of course, of the American Rescue Plan. It was the latest $1.9 trillion relief package that was passed through reconciliation. It's an interesting time, politically for folks, because it was such a popular and needed relief package for so many small business owners. That it continued to struggle, that it's hard to attack the size or the scope of this debt package politically. And so it's really hampered. I think some of the critics or opponents of this package or the size of the package are some of the things that were included because it's not politically advantageous. And so it's been interesting that we were able to get that passed. For those keeping track, since the start of the pandemic, we've added about $5 trillion in debt since the start of the COVID-19. So it's an interesting thing that, we continue to wrestle with the rising debt. And many of you in Colorado have been strong proponents of Fix the Debt and Committee for Responsible Federal Budget. And I know those guys are pulling their hair out and, watching these debt packages. And of course, some of the news we're going to share on infrastructure, which started with about $1 trillion package and has now gone to $3 trillion, and rumors that it may hit $4 trillion before President Biden's big unveiling tomorrow of the big infrastructure deal are going to be screaming. But such as the times in DC, I think there's a willingness under this single party rule right now to try and be bold, to swing for the fences and trying to do some things that they feel is advantageous and needed for the American public. And so that brings us to a couple interesting times today, sitting on the infrastructure eve, which is not a national holiday, but for those of us that have been following Infrastructure Week year after year, which has become the DC punchline, sitting now in a position that we're actually going to be talking about a infrastructure package is actually really exciting for us political wonkies and those of us that understand how important fixing our nation's crumbling infrastructure is. So much more than just asphalt and concrete and increasing lane capacity on our roads and bridges. That's a much bigger package. Actually, CEO John Hayes at Ball Corp actually talked about the need to include improvements to our nation's recycling in there. Of course, how much Ball does in the packaging and bottling. There's a lot around broadband, certainly our nation's grid. What happened in Texas is trying to highlight on that. We're still dealing with repercussions from Flint, Michigan, and our water issues there. So it's sorely needed. Those of you that get stuck in congestion and Juliet and I were talking before the show started, we loved the days where everybody was home at Zoom, and now we're back to sitting in traffic again as people are starting to get back out. And so understanding the impacts on loss in productivity and safety around infrastructure is critical. So stay tuned. This is going to be a big announcement. It's a big deal for business that want to remain competitive, safely move products up and down our nation's interstate system, get out to airports, improve our air travel as well. It's going to be fascinating. Different views on how this is going to be paid for, of course. There's been a lot of discussion about taxing the wealthy and taxes on corporations, which are really, in essence, roll back President Trump's Tax Cuts and Jobs Acts that he passed There's also a discussion about how much of this should be borne by user fees, whether it's a vehicle miles tax, whether it happens to be some kind of congestion tax like they do in Europe. There's a couple of our cities right now, San Francisco, New York, we're kind of toying with. So basically, it's a pretty big toll to enter the city. I've heard somewhere estimates in some of these cities are looking at $14 to $20 each time you come into the city. So quite pricey. So we'll see. We actually did get President Biden's long-awaited first press conference that happened. So I know there's been a lot of people wondering if he was being shielded or if he was just too busy running the government to hold the presser. He actually had his first press conference, and by and large, I think came out of it unscathed, without some of the gaffes and flub ups that a lot of people were anxiously waiting for, like a NASCAR race, to see if there was going to be any Biden crashes. I think he did quite well, and by and large, for the most part, it's the start of his presidency. We're in days 60s, heading toward the 100-day marker. Has been fairly well handled, and I think a lot of folks, politics aside, have kind of started in DC at least to understand, I think, the resetting of kind of the decorum and the messaging coming out of the White House and America's role and how we're viewed. And so there's been a little bit of a breath of fresh air. Certainly the political pundits of President Biden and some fervent Trump supporters would vehemently argue that. And, it remains to be seen politically what's going to happen on the backside. But when you start thinking about reconciliation in this package, for those of you that understand how the America Rescue Plan was passed, it was using that kind of that arcane process known as reconciliation, which basically moves from a 60 vote threshold to 51 votes. You actually can use that once a year. It's not an easy thing to fit within that package, but because there was no budget passed last year, we actually were able to use that package as a carryover in the fiscal year to pass that. So this administration has, in their minds, a second bite at the apple on reconciliation. What is you're just going to start hearing about, for those of you that like to follow this on the cutting edge, Section 304, and Senate President Schumer now thinks he has found really, for lack of a better word, a magic pill that would potentially could enable the Senate to use the reconciliation a third time this year as well. And so if you haven't heard about Section 304, pay attention, because as reconciliation talks start to continue to mount, you're going to hear a lot about that. And there's a lot of discussion about, obviously, how that contradicts a lot of President Biden's discussions around wanting to be bipartisan and build these coalitions, work together for the good of the American people, using reconciliation really as a tool by the majority to push through things without bipartisan support. And you're starting to see and hear some murmurings around that, whether that's going to be tied into the infrastructure package, whether it's going to be tied into another relief package, or using this new Section 304, both of those and or others. So a lot of talk around that. Changes, of course, on the fringes, talk around changes to the state and local tax deductions. That was one of the big changes in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act by President Trump. Changes on the capital gains, putting that to $1 million at death exemption. And so it'll be interesting to see how these things all get rolled into these new packages. 51st statehood talks are actually continuing with a lot more, I think, enthusiasm from the left. There is a lot of discussion around what representation would look like. Certainly, if DC did receive a 51st statehood, it would put that larger than several other states, which I think you see the residents of the District of Columbia feeling like they have been unrepresented. Certainly, it would change and tilt a little bit the balance of power. And so, while a lot of people want to talk about representation, there's a fear that this is a political tool to move the very left District of Columbia to gain 2 additional Senate seats, tilting further the balance of power. So that is not going anywhere. That talk continues to ramp up and heat up there. Speaking of kind of the 51st statehood, we just finished the 2020 census, and so we're now in that process of redistricting and reapportionment. Which, sorry, I got my elbow squeaking here. You got redistricting and reapportionment. In Colorado, of course, they went through a lengthy process to redo the rules and move it away from a partisan legislative process into more of a holistic process where there's an actual committee that's appointed in Colorado. These types of things are going to be ramping up, and it's critical. You see a lot of in-migration happening in this country as folks are fleeing certain states with higher taxes, with not the economic promise jobs, and it's changing the landscape where you may see states like Colorado and others gain legislative congressional seats. There's a lot of talk Colorado could gain an 8th congressional seat, which would be great for those in Colorado, but then sets up quite a fight and how important these processes and redistricting and reapportionment. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
I'm going to interrupt you for
just. You look like you're ready to jump there.
I know. I was like, could you tell? I've got just a couple of people that hopped on here. Our Jeffco treasurer, Jerry DiGillo. I also see Laura and Jeanette and several other people that are hopping onto broadcast with us. We have Jeff providing us a national update. Jerry had a question. He was really determined that we answer it for him. So it's been in the queue. I'll go ahead and pull it up. And this is to put it in context. We were really talking about some of the issues that we're seeing nationally, specifically as it relates to infrastructure. We mentioned things like Flint, Michigan, and their water issue that kind of transpired several years ago that they're still working through. Even discussed some of the issues that took place down in Texas just recently with the natural disaster that took place. And then this new renewed focus, which is wonderful. I mean, we've been trying to get people not only statewide, but even nationally to look at infrastructure reform or something to really improve some of our roadways. So Jerry's question relates to one of the comments that you made. And I know you were throwing out there examples of how do they raise funds for that, because that's always the biggest challenge is where do we pull from, how much do we pull, or where do we raise it from? And you suggested, there might be congestion traffic, there might a tax that goes in there, there might be, road tax that's there, it might be on the wealthy, etc. So Jerry's asking as it relates to Tabor, which you are very well familiar with, that protects us as Colorado taxpayers on road tax in Colorado. Would it need to go to the vote since it would be something national, or what would that really look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things that the U.S. Chamber, as you're representing the Westy Chamber there in Westminster, certainly understands that, states have taken national inaction on infrastructure into their own hands and passed things like increasing their own gas tax. Wyoming, Texas, several other states, even red states have passed increases. Inside Colorado, you've seen areas like Colorado Springs that have shown some increases to deal with infrastructure locally. Colorado certainly could do something on their own, but this would not go to the vote of the people if it was handled at a national level. And so the plan that's going to be proposed by the president, if enacted, would be passed by our congressional representatives in the House and Senate, signed by President Biden, that would certainly bound Colorado to whatever that package that was passed. So great question. I think there's a lot of people, Jerry, if you're a fan of Tabor, that would like to see balanced budgets and the Tabor type protections put across every state or even nationally that we don't enjoy today. We talked a little bit about the rising debt and deficits that are occurring every day. And certainly Colorado's been one of those states via Tabor that have put those protections in place. But Colorado certainly has had several discussions. We hosted, when I was in Colorado running Covert, the Moving Colorado Forward, and there were several organizations that came together with very different ideas around how to fund infrastructure in Colorado. And if had any of those moved forward, it certainly would have had to have gone to the vote of the people. So, great question. Great question. I think one of the other things that's really interesting, in kind of in closing with some of the quick updates out here, and then we can certainly talk about any of these, is really some of the voting rights that have been going on. And you just saw in Georgia sweeping voter reform package, I think in large part based on what happened with the 2 U.S. Senate seats that were up in special election and it went based on the earlier votes and not gaining that majority. And so you had 2 Democrat senators elected out of Georgia that really tipped the balance from a Republican-controlled Senate. Since then, the state legislatures that are controlled obviously by Republicans and a Republican governor passed some very onerous changes to voter access that they feel was an abuse in this last election. There's been a lot of pushback. There's discussions about moving things like the All-Star games out of Georgia based on that. We heard similar things that happened in North Carolina around Black Lives Matter and other things on hosting All-Star games because of the corporate pushback and political pushback that happened there. So just another thing to kind of keep in mind and watch across this country as we talk about access to the ballot and really what that looks like, and ensuring that every vote counts, that every American that's an eligible voter has the access and opportunity to vote in a fair way, but not abusing and extending necessarily deadlines or things that might influence an election. And I think we had enough discussion about whether there were abuses or not. And Supreme Courts and courts across this country have looked at that. There's challenges on Dominion voting systems. There were obviously opportunities to extend voting centers, extend voting days, have mail that was increased up to 3 additional days in certain states to receive ballots. And so I think people are going to continue to look at those to ensure that elections are handled fairly, securely, safely, but again, more importantly, allow us as citizens to exercise our constitutional right to cast a vote. And so it's balancing that. But Georgia sure made some news on the heels of their election, then to turn around and do a voting right. So stay tuned to that as well. That's a little bit of the DC umbrella in a nutshell. Really excited about tomorrow's infrastructure unveiling, just to see the depth of the package, what's included in there, and then just as important, maybe more important for some, how in the world we're going to pay for a $3-4 trillion package, and what it means to us, right, as regular citizens, as business leaders, whether it's corporate tax changes or whether we individually are going to bear some of this through some form of user fee. So a lot happening here as always, but I will say this. I know we kind of couch this, Juliet, as a little bit of some COVID updates. I know we were talking a little bit beforehand. There is certainly a renewed sense of optimism that we're seeing across this country. Certainly in DC, people are starting to open businesses, attend live sporting events, starting to host in-person meetings. Travel on the roads is certainly up, as we talked about congestion. Airports and the amount of people are screened at TSA are continuing to set records. We're over 1.5 million a day at peak. I think many people saw what happened in Florida during spring break. Maybe that was an anomaly, maybe not, but certainly I think you see a lot more hope around getting our arms around putting COVID behind us and regaining whatever the new normal is. Based on vaccines, the Pfizer, Moderna, the new Johnson & Johnson, potentially a fourth one that may be coming soon. So it's exciting, I think, for many of us to start to feel that there's an opportunity for us to get back into a little bit of reopening businesses and starting to put some relief, not just from the government side, but really from the customer base, the demand side, that so many people look at in trying to drive and get their businesses back afoot. So we're excited about that. And hopefully you guys are seeing that in Colorado as well.
I think as we said right before we hopped on here, there is definitely some optimism that's in the air. I think a big part of it is those vaccines that you were just discussing. And I know that the governor announced that starting Friday onward, anyone is eligible to get those vaccines. So I know yesterday we provided those updates if you were 50 or above, or if you were 16 and had underlying conditions or above, that you can get access to those. But now that's opening up fully starting on Friday. And with that, I think it's a renewed sense of optimism and that customer influence influence and just positivity will be brought forth, hopefully, to the community. When you're talking about the amount of debt that we've incurred in the process, I think the earlier number that you gave us was a $5 trillion label that's been fed in. The only way that we can dig ourselves out is through economic growth. And so the sooner that we can really get our businesses back up and going and get started on new business ideas, I think that would be the best approach to it.
Well, it certainly generates, Juliet, a lot of new tax revenue, right, which is so critical to not only state governments, but also local governments. And you're seeing a lot of impact on governments right now that have seen a decrease in revenue. I think the one last thing, and I know we're up against the clock, but there's a little bit going on right now. We didn't talk literally about immigration, which is one of those big passions. And I'd saved it for last. I wanted to make sure we reference that. There's been a lot of discussion and certainly a broad use of the executive order pin from this president to unwind a lot of President Trump's immigration policies. There was a feeling from many that some of the unwinding and the messaging coming out of the White House might actually cause more harm. And you're seeing now what many are labeling a crisis at the border again. So much so that the president has been forced to really, I think, start to account for that and ignore, I think, what he had hoped a problem that might go away through some of those executive orders that he's now appointed Vice President Harris to be the new immigration czar and dispatched her to Mexico, to the border, to start to deal with some of the issues around what this new influx of immigrants coming in. Certainly, we want to be humane, we want to be just, we want to be compassionate. Many of these folks immigrants are dealing with a lot of challenges back at home, whether it's economic or political. The use of asylum is obviously a very critical and necessary tool, but we want to make sure that folks are not abusing that power, that they're entering legally, and that certainly with the COVID and the pandemic, that we understand the health risk and stuff. And so it's another important issue that's going on that you're hearing a lot about and how we handle immigration. So just want to make sure we got that.
No, I think that's great because there are so many things that's on our radar. Sometimes it's hard to, remember to emphasize some key important items. And I know at the time that you were with Corbett here in Colorado, we had a coalition that had gotten back started, a resurge toward immigration. I'm pleased to tell you that when I was gone, they had a meeting. It's kind of like a virtual fly-in with Senator Hickenlooper. And we did have representation from the business community from our chamber on that. And the discussion centered around what does immigration reform look like? How can we support those dreamers or those people that are here and allow them the economic opportunity and freedom to be able to, better their livelihoods? I mean, they're here. And so let's find a way that we can coexist and make it work for the better part of our nation. I'm going to just interject here really quickly, if that's okay, Jeff, because I thought of a few other things COVID related that I wanted to bring up. We had discussed about transportation. So what I went ahead and did, especially for Jerry, since he was asking that question as it related to Tabor, was include some information on a proposed Democratic bill right now that's at our state legislature. That would be a $4 billion transportation fund, essentially created through a fee that's added onto your gas. I've included as much of the caption or the information about that piece of legislation into the comment section. So if anyone is interested in further information about that bill or any other state bills that we are following or monitoring, please let me know so we can get you involved, incorporated in our government affairs group. Additional updates. I know earlier you mentioned that relief bill that finally passed through the 1.9. Some of that also discussed obviously the extension of the PPP deadline that has transpired, and even the SBA most recently announced a new grant. It's labeled as a venue operator grant. So if you think of theaters, if you think of event spaces, live production, all of those arts and entertainment locations that were really affected by COVID, they now have an opportunity to apply for a grant that opens up actually on April the 8th through SBA. The application, I'll include the link into the comment section for anyone that might qualify for that or be interested in it. Before I let you go, is there anything as it relates to housing on the national level, Jeff, that we want to mention? I know we have talked here at the state level about banning evictions or, extending the eviction moratorium and things like that. Was there anything that you're hearing rumblings of that continuing or coming back to fruition at the national level?
It's definitely one of the talks about, I don't think many of us out in DC feel that we're done with relief packages. And so I think there's still a lot of concerns around impacts to hospitality, lodging, some of the entertainment venues, and what we need to continue to do to support those. And in part of that, you obviously have a big challenge around renters, mortgage loan forgivenesses that they're still talking about and how that could impact renters. And I think there's a little bit of a wait and see. I think this has been put on the back burner because of so much discussion around immigration and infrastructure. I think this president is very good at compartmentalizing. I think he really wants to go from issue to issue, and I think you're seeing him start to explore issues. And so I think as the American Rescue Plan was kind of that box checked, relief package done, he's moved on. Immigration's kind of, I think, that little thorn that keeps poking and biting at him that he's had to deal with aside. But he definitely is trying to deal with the infrastructure issue now. And I think as time goes on, we'll start to see him move back toward kind of one more potential relief package, or exploring what this looks like on any kind of loan forgiveness or potential around some of the areas on the fringes that still need to be addressed. And certainly, we've talked about PPP a lot in the business community, but, when you start to break that down to individual residents and citizens, their ability to pay rent, it is no different than, a business's ability to pay rent and employees. So there seems to be at least some discussion, but backburnered for now.
Okay. And it looks like Jerry is following up with us on that discussion as it relates to those moratoriums, especially as those foreclosures that are transpiring. That federal deadline looks to be ending on June the 30th. So I would imagine, as you've just shared, Jeff, as they're looking at what additional reliefs, what extensions they may need to implement over the next several months, that they would hopefully tackle this as one of those priority issues, not only for employees, but of course, families that are trying to make it through this time.
For sure. And I think there's so many people that have struggled, and the impact's been very different. We're seeing the recovery is not a pretty traditional UV. It's more of a K-shaped recovery. And the impacts are felt very differently. And we know there's some businesses that are certainly surviving. And some businesses have been able to retool, redeploy assets and resources very differently to deal with the impacts of this pandemic. Certainly, I'd love to have my last name, at least financially, have Bezos behind it instead of Wasden. A guy that's net worth continues to grow by millions and billions every day. And so, we understand that there's those that are doing great, but on the ground, the foreclosure issues, bill paying, relief from, just heat, gas, water, those types of things, trash, sewer pickup, go down the line, are so critical to ensure that we've got the right kind of relief and are supporting those most in need.
Absolutely. Well, Jeff, we're over our time, although I know that you and I can probably go back and forth excessively, because there's more things that are on my list that I would love to pick your brain on. But in the interest of making people want to continue to come back to my live broadcasts, I do have to cut us off. But here's what I'm going to do.
They'll come back because it's you. They'll once you get rid of me, they'll probably be more inclined to come back.
So. Not at all. You are the expert on all things national right now, Jeff. So here's what I'm thinking. Instead of once every 8 months, let's try and regroup and come back to them maybe in the next month or two, because I feel like there are going to be things, one, that come off of this new relief bill that's been passed. Of course, this next discussion that's taking place, whether immigration does move forward, whether this bill that the Democrats passed through for the Dreamers actually does make it over to the side where they consider it further. I mean, so many implications that I think if we end up staying for a long period of time, we'll have passed those. So if you're comfortable with it, we can come back here and maybe do another month between now and the next time And then Tina has one question. She's like, yes, please. So it is decided you are going to be with me once a month. One last question. This is related to furloughs. So how many count? Okay, so you're asking, Tina, your question I think is more for the county. We have Jeff for national. So unless Jeff is reading up on all 64 counties in Colorado, I don't know that he is paying attention to that entirely.
I can make up a number, Tina, but it would be grossly inaccurate. So hopefully, Julie, I can get you back with some updated information on county up in Westminster. But certainly look forward to coming back a lot sooner than once every 8 months and sharing some additional updates with you. And again, congratulations. We're so proud of you.
So much. Thank you so much. It was such a blessing to be able to represent Colorado nationally and to get us where we did. And that hasn't transpired in over a decade. So quite an accomplishment for us. And I'm entirely grateful to the community and the state that I serve, and to you as well for being on here with me. So let's plan on another discussion a month from now. We'll reconvene about not only the relief bill, some of these other questions that we've gotten along the way, and maybe we can answer some additional questions. And Tina, I will get you an answer hopefully on the number of furloughed employees. But if you end up tuning into this broadcast and we are no longer live, give me a hashtag replay so I know that you tuned into this. If you ended up watching it while we were already on here for about 10-15 minutes, you can always rewind and rewatch. You can binge watch any of the videos that we have on a weekend evening, or if you just want to get away from people that might be drawing for your attention. It's in the video section here of our page. It is also on our YouTube channel, Westminster Chamber of Commerce. And stay tuned. We are in the mode of now that things are going back to some sort of a normalcy, so does our program, so does our event, so does the outreach that we do as a chamber organization. So we'll continue to do our advocacy as it relates to city, county, and state, and of course, as it relates to communicating what's going on with all things COVID, all things regulations, and of course, representing our businesses as those decisions are made, but know that the outward component is going to start coming back. So Jeff, thank you so much for being on here with us. I enjoyed my time with you, and I hope you have an awesome rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks for all you're doing. Congrats